Why would anyone want to perpetuate that kind of indignity on anyone else for any reason?
It was prison. The only saving grace, it was prison with your family and people that you love.
If history repeats itself over and over, we need to make sure that it will never happen again.
We shouldn't be ashamed that we have these hard histories here, but we should be ashamed if we want to forget it.
More than 13,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated here during World War II. Most were American citizens. None had been convicted of a crime. Their story asks a question every generation must answer. How do we protect our freedoms when our nation faces fear? Tonight, we revisit one of America's greatest civil rights failures, not just to remember it, but to understand why it still matters today. "84 years ago, this quiet stretch of southern Idaho became the site of one of the darkest chapters in American history. In 1942, thousands of Japanese Americans were forced from their homes and brought here to the Minidoka War Relocation Center, not because of anything they had done, but because of fear, suspicion, and prejudice. Behind me in these barracks were families, children, American citizens, people who were forced out of their homes because of a decision made in a moment of crisis.
A lot of people like to think that the Japanese American incarceration began with the Imperial Japan attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. But a lot of the anti-Asian sentiment existed prior to that helped lead to the conditions that led to the forced removal of Japanese Americans on the West Coast. On February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt actually signed Executive Order 9066, which allowed the U.S. military to prescribe military zones and exclude people from those areas. Over 110,000 people were incarcerated and forcibly removed from their homes. Total incarceration was about 125,000 people. August 1942 is when Minidoka Relocation Center opened up. So majority of the people who were brought here was from the Seattle and Portland areas. Peak population here at Minidoka was a little under 10,000 people, but 13,000 people came through this facility during its operation. There's a variety of experience. There's no one narrative that tells this experience. You hear some of the children's perspective. You'll hear a lot of them are like, I had fun in camp because they got to spend time with their friends. You know, they got to go to school and play games, but it was really harder for the older generations. Mitsuha Endo, who was an incarceree at Topaz, she actually was fighting saying, hey, we haven't had our due process. The administration at the time said, we're gonna close the camps next year. So starting in 1945, a lot of the camps started to close down. Minidoka closed in October 1945. People were just given $25 and a one-way ticket to rebuild their lives. That was it. That was the assistance that they got.
We gather here today to right a grave wrong. We must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake.
In 1988, the federal government offered an official apology and redress to the Japanese American community through the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. It allowed for reparations and redress. 25 years ago, Minidoka became a National Historic Site through presidential proclamation under President Clinton. But over the course of that time, the community has come back to honor their community's history with these pilgrimages. As an adult, I start to find these pockets of Japanese Americans and be able to explore my identity through these pilgrimages and provide a sense of healing because my family did not talk about it.
After the war, thousands of incarcerees were left to pick up the pieces and rebuild their lives. Some went home, while others, home was no longer an option. Jobs, businesses, homes, they were all gone. So having to rebuild here in Idaho was the best choice for them. Our Hunter Funk spoke to a survivor here in Idaho who was born inside the encampment.
I was born here in camp. Block 13, Barrack 7, June 26, 1943. My grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and my parents, we were all in the same barrack.
Karen's parents were part of the first 200 who came to open the camp. But by the time she was born, a future outside of the barracks became a reality.
One of the farmers appreciated the Japanese culture, or I don't know, the workers, and came to camp and offered my dad a job as a farmhand. So he moved us out when I was 18 months old.
Karen was too young to remember the camp itself, but not too young to inherit its story. One her parents spent decades trying to protect her from.
They never talked about it. Not to us, not to the kids. When people who were in camp with her came, they would speak to each other in Japanese. We would hear the word camp sometimes, and your 6 and 10-year-old mind says summer camp. You know, we had no concept. I did not know what the incarceration really was until I volunteered to the Manzanar pilgrimage. And talking to the incarcerees, I finally understood what it meant. So then I came home and told Mom, "You never told us." And she said, "You didn't need to know." Those were the lost years. And all we can do is to make sure you don't have to go through that.
And when some of the stories finally came, so did the heartbreak.
Grandma said they must really hate us because they're treating us like animals. I don't remember that, of course, but Mom told me that. And she said, "I don't know if it was to give us a definition of your place in this world. I don't know."
They lived behind barbed wire, under armed guards, for years. They built schools, started farms, found jobs inside the camp, and created a community, all while waiting for the day they could go home. But for many, there was no home left to return to. They had lost businesses, savings, and years of their lives. Many Japanese American families had no choice but to start over.
They have no idea what.
Karen grew up on a farm near Twin Falls, went to Idaho schools, built a career helping children. But she says surviving that chapter of history isn't enough.
10,000 Japanese Americans out here.
It has to be remembered, especially by the youngest members of her family.
She said, "Auntie Karen, where are those bad people who did the bad thing to Pachan and Jichan?" And I said, "They're not there. There's not there." And she looked at me and she said, "But Auntie Karen, we're still Japanese." I just gave her a hug. And I said, "It's because you're Japanese that we have to go there."
Simple words that stopped Karen in her tracks. Karen says that's exactly why these stories have to be told. Not to reopen the old wounds, but to remind us how quickly fear can replace freedom and how easily history can repeat itself if no one is left to remember.
I think people need to know this history because they need to know what the Japanese Americans went through. Why can't we act like we're human? And we're not Japanese American, we're not whatever, Mexican, black. The first thing we need to acknowledge is our humanity, because that's what makes us alive, and that's what makes us strong.
The story of Minidoka didn't end when the camp closed. Many former incarcerees left Idaho to rebuild their lives, and some of their journeys took them to Oregon, and with them were the memories they carried that would last a lifetime. Our journey now takes us to Portland, where KGW's Catherine Cook shares the story of one survivor.
Life has taught Jean Shioshi many lessons.
We can all be friends and work together.
Selfless pearls of wisdom.
It's not all about me, it's about all of us, and that we should all cooperate and try to make things better.
And at 103,
oh, I am old.
Jean still smiles despite the suffering she endured through some of those lessons.
Life is interesting, so you have to make it better as you go along.
Life got very interesting in 1942. It was the Second World War, and President Roosevelt's executive orders forced thousands of Japanese Americans into internment camps. Jean was 19 when her family, who lived in Redmond, Oregon, was ushered into the Minidoka War Relocation Center in south central Idaho.
My mother always said, our family has to stay together, so we always stay together.
Comprised of 12 barracks, schools, general stores, and other amenities, Minidoka operated a little like a small, high-desert town. Its images and artifacts preserved in Portland at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. Minidoka was also surrounded by barbed wire, armed guards, and in the middle of nowhere.
Not great, miserable conditions, but she had her family with her.
Judy Shioshi, one of Jean's 6 children, says it's important that history not forget what Minidoka was and was not.
Relocation camp? Don't you just think of summer camp or something fun? It's really a misnomer. It was prison, and the only saving grace, it was prison with your family and people that you love.
Last year, Jean and her family embarked on a pilgrimage to Minidoka, now a historical site. Yes, there were memories of discomfort, but there were also flashbacks of resilience and the same hope that remains deeply ingrained within Jean.
And even the camps, I think it was kind of interesting to see, when I look back, how everybody worked instead of being, negative about things and feel sorry for themselves. They worked on to working and getting on for better times.
In these times, Judy wants everyone to know that Minidoka was a critical chapter in our history, not a footnote to be ignored.
So that they can remember and not repeat. Right now, there's detention camps, and it's just not right. And you can look to history and see, we did this, it was terribly wrong.
I think we've come quite a long ways. Of course, we can go a lot more.
Still looking ahead at 103 with one last pearl of wisdom, a pure and simple truth.
If you're all sane, wouldn't that be a dull community?
For many survivors, that journey led them back to Washington to have to rebuild their lives from the ground up, a life that had been disrupted by incarceration. One of those survivors was just a child when her family was sent to Minidoka. After the war, they made a new home in Washington, a journey that shaped not only her life, but the generations that followed.
When I heard on the radio that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, we were shocked.
Citizens and aliens alike would have to move.
I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act.
The use of the Alien Enemies Act today is, in some ways, even more egregious than it was in World War II.
This country of ours haven't learned at all. I'm a Fujiko Gardner. I'm 93 years old and a survivor of Minidoka camp. Right here. This is me. I was born in Fife, Washington. We were financially poor but rich in many ways because we lived on a farm. It was a happy life. I remember getting a new metal lightweight suitcase that I filled with some clothes and things. We had to go on the big truck to Puyallup.
So most Japanese Americans in the Seattle area were initially held at a temporary concentration camp on the Puyallup Fairgrounds.
I've always looked forward to the fair because of their hamburger. It was a shock to see the mass of Japanese people and to see all the soldiers in their uniform with carrying a rifle. How can one place change to such a sad place? From the Puyallup Assembly Center, we were boarded on the rickety old train coming from Washington State, where everything is green, and going to Idaho, where everything is dry. It was a sad, sad train ride. It was miles of black barracks, so it was a dismal scene in Idaho. Being incarcerated at Minidoka really felt like we were in jail. You didn't have privacy when you went to take your shower or when you went to the bathroom. We knew my father had changed drastically, and so we were aware that he would be capable of ending his own life.
Meaningful, insightful tour led by Kelsey and her grandma.
There was also open cracks in the walls, and so the tar paper couldn't heat the dust.
My granddaughter is interested in learning more about Minidoka. We've gone to 8 pilgrimages together.
I'm a quarter Japanese, so my only connection to the Japanese American community was through my grandma. Walking that space together, it might have just been my grandmother's history, but now that we've experienced together, it's our history and it's my history.
The Japanese Americans had made a good example of what immigrants can do for the United States.
A dramatic escalation of President Trump's illegal immigration crackdown.
This country of ours have not learned anything from the past.
I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
Today, the Alien Enemies Act is used to designate immigrants as an invading force, as if that we are at war with other nations, other communities whose people are coming to the U.S. for a better life. It is, in some ways, even more egregious than it was in World War II.
It's just unbelievable to me what immigrants are faced with today.
And all of the experiences of the World War II Japanese American incarceration leaves me with just questioning, what does it mean to be an American? And how do you prove your Americanness?
The detention centers that are holding immigrants today are in many ways reflective of the experiences of Japanese Americans incarcerated at places like Minidoka and Puyallup.
I'm worried about our country today.
What can people do now? It is important for people not to lose hope, not to accept the continued dehumanization and scapegoating of immigrants. It's important to recognize that the people who are making these decisions, that immigrants are not indeed a threat to our country.
If history repeats itself over and over, we need to make sure that it will never happen again.
Most of the barracks are gone now, and the guard towers have been rebuilt only as reminders. And the silence that now fills Minidoka can make it hard to imagine the thousands of lives that were forever changed here. Historians say that it stands as a reminder of what can happen when fear and uncertainty influence public policy. Today, debates over immigration, border security, government authority, and national security continue across the country. The Trump administration has expanded immigration enforcement through increased ICE arrests, detentions, and deportation efforts. While supporters argue that those policies strengthen public safety and uphold immigration law, critics have also raised concerns about due process, family separation, and the treatment of immigrants in government custody.
There's so much remnants of what's happening today with what happened to my community. And the one thing is, like, my community was harmed many years ago, and we may not get harmed again, but you're watching the same thing happen over and over again, almost using the same kind of footprint.
What would you say to someone who says you can't compare the two? They're not the same.
I would say, if you do your research, it is the same. It's just a different community being targeted. We don't sit with that discomfort. We could never acknowledge it and move on, and that's part of the healing process. We shouldn't be ashamed that we have these hard histories here, but we should be ashamed if we want to forget it.